My cousin stole my dragon at the awakening, sealed his name over my bond, and my whole family called it justice. My father handed me the runt instead, and told me to be grateful they ever let a dead maid's son keep the family name. Everyone waited for me to break. I didn't, because I knew something they didn't. One time, taking out the garbage, I saw it. The runt can steal power from any living thing it touches. It has no power of its own. It only takes, and there's no ceiling. The longer it fights, the stronger it gets, until its power is unrivaled. The succession hunt decides who rules House Dorn. The winner's word becomes law, the whole family fortune, theirs, and the losers cast out for good. They gave me a runt and swore that the day I lost, they'd disown me and put me on the street. They never dreamed they'd handed me a weapon. Win, and I could throw every last one of them out, take the name and the fortune they were so sure was theirs. The only question was time. Could I make this runt stronger than the legendary dragon they stole from me before the hunt began? Let me take you back to the hall, before any of that made sense. The awakening chamber smelled of cold iron and incense. Every heir of House Dorn stood in a ring of pale stone. I stood at the edge, where they always put me. My boots were borrowed. My coat had been mended twice. None of that mattered, because I had topped the trials. Everyone. The numbers had been read aloud, and the room had gone quiet in a way I will never forget. I want you to understand what those trials cost me. The Trueborn had tutors. They had years of training beasts to practice on, libraries no servant was allowed to touch, every advantage a great house can buy, a child it loves. I had a candle stub and the hours after my chores. I read the texts I wasn't permitted to read by stealing them back from the wash baskets where the heirs left them. I learned beast lore from the stable hands who tolerated me. And I beat them anyway, every test. Every measure but the one that counted to them, which was blood. A lowborn ward had beaten them all. The elders had not liked it. But the trials are the trials. Old law says the highest score draws first at the awakening, and the bond goes where the blood calls. So I stepped forward when my name was read. Just my name, Suho. No house behind it, because they had never let me carry one cleanly. The awakening basin sat at the center, black water under a thin skin of light. You cut your palm, you let the blood fall. And the beast that answers your blood is yours for life. I cut deep. I wanted no excuse for them to say it hadn't taken. The blood hit the water, and the water answered. It came up out of the basin like a storm deciding to have a shape. Scales the color of a banked forge, wings that filled the upper dark of the hall. A true dragon, the kind House Dorn had not bonded in 3 generations. It turned its great head, and its eyes found me. Only me. The bond began to form, a thread of heat running from my torn palm into its chest, and for one breath, the whole room understood what they were looking at. A dead maid's son had called a true dragon. For one breath, I had everything. Then Bren moved. My cousin had stood across the ring in his white heir's coat, smiling the way he always smiled, like the world had already been promised to him in writing. He stepped into the light while the bond was still forming. Still soft, still unsealed. And he pressed his heir ring into the thread of heat between me and the dragon. The ring flared. I felt the bond lurch like a rope yanked from my hands. "What are you doing?" I said. My voice did not shake. I am proud of that, even now. Bren did not answer me. He spoke to the dragon. He spoke his own name into the unfinished bond over and over, his ring burning against the heat, writing himself where my blood had already written first. The thread of warmth in my palm went cold. The dragon's head turned from me, slowly, like a door closing. "Stop him," I said to the elders. To my father, to anyone. "The bond is mine. The blood called it." "You all saw." "We saw an irregularity," said one of the elders. That was the word they chose, irregularity. As if a theft were a clerical error. My father stepped forward then. He did not look at me the way a father looks at a son. He looked at me the way you look at a stain you have decided not to clean. "The trial scores were never meant to seat a ward above the Trueborn," he said. The bond corrected itself. It did not correct itself. My hands were fists. Bren forced it. With the ring. You watched him do it. "The heir ring carries the blood of House Dorn," said the elder. "If the dragon accepted Bren's seal, then the dragon recognizes the true line. The matter is settled." That was how they did it. They did not deny the theft. They renamed it. They took the thing I had earned, and they called the taking justice, and every powdered, perfumed face in that ring nodded along, because it was easier than admitting a maid's boy had outdrawn them all. Bren stood under the dragon now. He raised his ringed hand, and the beast lowered its head to him, and the hall broke into applause. For him. For the thief. He found my eyes over the noise, and he smiled wider, and I understood that the smile was the point. The dragon was a prize. My face was the real reward. Don't look so wounded, cousin, Bren said, low. Just for me. You'll have something too, Father insisted. I should tell you what I felt. The truth is, I felt very little right then. Something in me had gone quiet and flat and cold, the way the basin water went still after the blood left it. I think they expected screaming. I think Bren had been looking forward to the screaming. I gave him nothing. That was my first mistake, by their measure. A broken thing is safe. A quiet thing is a question. My father gestured, and a stable hand brought out a covered crate. He set it at my feet and pulled the cloth. Inside was the runt. I had seen newborn beasts before. They have a kind of awful brightness, a glow under the skin where the power sits. This one had none. It was the size of a half-grown hound, all loose gray hide and knob joints, with 2 stubs where horns should be and a pair of wings too small to lift it. Its eyes were filmed and dull. It did not look at the dragon. It did not look at anything. It just breathed, shallow and slow, like even that cost more than it had. The hall laughed. There, my father said. A beast for the boy who wants to be one of us. Train it, field it at the succession hunt with the rest of the heirs. He let the words hang. You know what the hunt decides. The winner rules House Dorn. His word becomes law. The whole family fortune passes to his hand, and he may cast out any name he pleases, even mine, even Bren's. That is what the trueborn play for. His mouth thinned. You will not win it, and I want you to hear me swear this in front of the house, so there is no mistaking it later. The day you lose, you are struck from the bloodline for good. No more name, no more roof. We put you out on the street where a dead-made son belongs. We have carried you long enough out of charity. The hunt is where charity ends. That thing won't survive a sparring yard, an elder murmured. Then he'll have his answer, my father said. He turned away. They all turned away. The dragon, my dragon, walked out of the hall at Bren's heel, and I was left kneeling beside a crate of gray skin and slow breath, with a deadline carved into my future and no possible way to meet it. That should have been the end of me. They sent me to the refuse yard that same afternoon because that is where they always sent me when they wanted me out of sight. Hauling the spoiled feed. The monster scraps too rotted even for the kennels, split cores gone dim, carcasses of training beasts that hadn't lasted, the gristle and ruined meat that the real heirs never had to smell. I carried the runt out with me in the crate because there was nowhere else to put it, and because some stubborn part of me would not leave it on the stone for them to step over. I tipped the feed into the pit and sat down on the wall, and I let myself for one moment feel the whole weight of it. The dragon. The name. The years of being grateful for scraps, and now this, a literal pile of scraps, and a sickly animal that would die before the hunt and take my future with it. Then the runt climbed out of the crate. I almost didn't notice. It moved slowly, dragging itself over the lip, down into the pit, into the spoiled feed. I thought, dully, that it was going to eat. Fine, let it eat. It would die either way. The smell of the yard was rot and ash and the iron tang of old beast blood. Flies hung over the pit in a slow, drifting haze. This was the bottom of House Dorn, the place where everything used up and broken finally came, and they had put me here so often I knew its corners better than my own narrow room. I had wept in this yard, younger. I had sworn in it. Today, I just sat, hollowed out, watching a sickly animal pick its way through garbage, and I thought, this is what I am now. This is the whole of my inheritance, a crate of slow breath and a pile of things nobody wanted. It put its mouth against a dead training core. One of the dim ones, cracked and worthless, the kind even the kennel master threw out. And the core went darker, not the runt. The core. The faint residual light still trapped inside the dead thing guttered, thinned, and went out completely, like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. And while it died, the runt changed, just slightly. The gray hide tightened over its ribs. One of the horn stubs pushed out a fraction, no longer a nub, but the start of a real spur. Its breathing deepened, its filmed eyes cleared by a shade. It was not eating the food, it was pulling the strength out of it. I sat very still on the wall. The runt moved to the next dead core and did it again. The core went inert. The runt grew. A carcass that still held a thread of beast power. The runt put its mouth to it, and the carcass went truly dead, emptied of the last of itself, and the runt's shoulders filled out by a hair's width. Power left the food. Power entered the runt. It made nothing of its own. It only took. I had spent my whole life being appraised. They had measured me 100 times and found nothing because they were looking for power I owned and I owned none. They had measured this creature too. No innate ability. A runt. Worthless. And they were wrong for the same reason they were always wrong, because they could only see what a thing held, and this thing held nothing at all until it took it from something else. I made myself test it before I let myself believe it. I found another core in the heap, one that still held the faintest glow, and I held it out. The runt dragged itself over and put its mouth to it, and I counted under my breath the way I'd counted everything in the trials. By the time I reached 40, the glow was gone, and the core was a cold dead stone, and the runt's ribs had filled by a finger's width. 40 counts, slow. Always slow. It was not a thunderbolt. It was a tide, patient and certain, and the longer the contact held, the more it pulled. I filed that away. The speed of the thing would matter more than I knew. A beast with no power of its own. A beast that drains the power of whatever it touches. I thought about the dragon walking out of the hall. The biggest power in the house, in Bren's hands. I thought about the hunt, where the heirs would throw their strongest beasts onto a field to prove themselves. I thought about what would happen if you put a creature that takes in a place that's full of things to take. The runt finished the last of the feed. The pit was full of dead, dark, emptied husks. The runt looked up at me for the first time, really looked, with eyes that were no longer dull, and I felt something pass between us that I had no name for yet. A beast that can drain the strength of anything has no ceiling. The longer it fights, the more it steals. And nobody in House Dorn, not my father, not the elders, not Bren with his stolen dragon and his stolen smile, had any idea what they had just handed me. I covered the pit. I put the runt back in the crate, gentle now, and I did not let my face change because the yard had windows and someone was always watching the maid's boy fail. Inside, the cold, flat quiet had become something else. Not grief. A plan, still shapeless, but hungry at the edges. They had given me until the succession hunt to put a real beast on the field. They thought it was a sentence. That night, I carried the crate back through the dark of the lower stables, past the stalls where the trained beast slept. Past the great far stall where I could hear the slow thunder of the dragon breathing in its sleep, Bren's name freshly burned over the bond that should have been mine. I set the crate down in the cold corner they'd allotted me. The runt did not sleep. It sat in the straw and watched the shadows where the dragon's breath came from, and its newly cleared eyes held a kind of patient, bottomless want, an emptiness that wasn't weakness at all. I understood it, because it was the same thing sitting in my own chest. The deadline hung over both of us like a blade. But the supposedly powerless runt watched the stable shadows with a hunger only I could see, and for the first time since the basin had gone still, I was not afraid of what came next. The washroom door had no lock, so I jammed it with the mop handle and crouched in the dark with the runt against my knees. Steam from the laundry boilers seeped under the wall. It was the one place in House Dorn where no one came looking for me, because no one wanted the work that happened here. That made it mine. I had carried the crate down through the servants' stairs before dawn, and now I knelt on the wet stone with my hands on the runt's gray hide, trying to think faster than the deadline could close. The trash yard had not been a fluke. I had to know that for certain. I had brought a dead kennel core in my coat, a small one, dim and cracked. I set it on the floor between us. "Go on," I whispered, "show me again." The runt put its mouth to the core. The core went dark. The runt's ribs tightened, its breath deepened, and I felt, through my palms, through the contact, a faint warm pull, like a tide turning somewhere under the skin of the world. Power leaving one thing, entering another. Slow, always slow. It took a long count before the core was fully spent. That was the catch, and I understood it even then. The drain was not a weapon you could swing. It was a tide. It needed time. It needed contact. The longer the touch, the more it took, and a fast enemy or a short fight would give it nothing at all. I turned it over the way I'd turned over every trial problem, looking for the shape of the rule. A weapon that needs time is useless against anything quick. A weapon that needs contact is useless against anything that keeps its distance. Those were the two ways to lose, and any enemy clever enough to see them would beat us without trying. But it cut both ways. Give the runt time and contact, and there was no upper limit at all. The stronger the thing it held, the bigger the meal. Most weapons get weaker against bigger foes. This one got hungrier. I had never heard of a power that worked like that. That, I suspected, was exactly why the appraisers couldn't see it. They were looking for a ceiling. It didn't have one. I thought about the hunt and felt the cold, flat quiet settle over me again. "You're not powerless," I told the runt. "You're empty." "There's a difference. Empty things can be filled." The runt lifted its head and looked at me, and I made my vow then, quietly, the way you make a promise you mean to keep when no one is listening. "I'm not going to throw you away," I said. "Whatever they did to me, I won't do to you. You're not a tool. We do this together, or not at all." Something answered, not a sound. A pulse. I felt it in my chest, steady and warm, 2 beats where my own heart should have given 1. The runt's filmed eyes had cleared enough now that I could see something behind them. Not animal, not quite. Recognition. The pulse came again, calm and sure, like a hand pressed flat against mine from the inside. I almost laughed, there on the wet floor. After everything, the first creature in this house to answer me was the one they'd called trash. "You need a name," I said. "A real one." "Not the runt, not what they called you." I thought of the old word for the dark between stars, the empty place that swallows light and gives nothing back, and it fit her so well, it ached. Because I knew, somehow, looking at her, that she was a she. "Lyra," I said. The pulse surged once, hard, and settled. "Lyra, then. I would have given us a year in that washroom, feeding her dead cores in secret, building her up where no one could see." Bren did not give us a week. The summons came 2 mornings later, scrawled on a steward's slate and shoved under the boiler room door. A training yard spar. Public. My name and my beast against an opponent of the heir's choosing. Refusal counted as forfeit, and forfeit, my father had made clear, counted as failure. Bren had noticed I wasn't broken. I had given him nothing in the hall, and a quiet thing is a question, and Bren could not abide a question he hadn't answered. So he was going to answer it the way he answered everything, in public, with a crowd, by making the maid's boy small. I barely slept before the spar. I lay in the straw with Lyra against me and ran through everything I knew, which was not enough. I had never handled a beast in a real match. The heirs had done it since they could walk. All I had was the rule, time and contact, longer and closer, and a creature too small to look like she could earn either. I told myself it would be enough. I was not sure I believed it. The deadline pressed on me in the dark, like a hand on the back of my neck. The training yard was a sunken ring of raked sand, ringed by tiered stone seats. Heirs lounged in the shade with cooled wine. Trainers leaned on the rail. Stable hands gathered at the back, the way servants do when they smell someone else's humiliation, grateful it isn't theirs. Bren sat highest, in white, with my dragon nowhere in sight. He didn't need it here. This wasn't a fight he intended to make fair. His opponent for me was a straw mite. A straw mite is a joke of a beast. Knee-high, plated like a beetle, slow and stupid, used to teach children how to stand their ground. Putting Lyra against a straw mite was not a test. It was a sentence designed to be survived just long enough to be laughed at. "A worthy match," Bren called down, and the heirs laughed on cue. Runt to runt. I carried Lyra to the sand and set her down. She looked smaller than ever under the open sky, gray and knobbed beside the armored mite. I crouched by her, one hand on her flank, and I spoke under the noise. "It's slow," I murmured. "Stay against it. Don't break away. The longer you hold on, the more you take. Let it think it's winning," the pulse answered. Steady, the mite charged. It was faster than it looked, that low scuttling rush, and it hit Lyra full in the chest and bore her down into the sand and pinned her flat under its plated bulk. The crowd roared with delight, pinned in 3 seconds. The maid's boy's runt, flattened by a nursery beast. "Get it up," a trainer jeered, "or does it need a nap?" Bren was smiling. This was exactly the picture he'd ordered. I made myself sit still and not shout, not reach in, not save her. The worst moment of my life to that point, watching her pinned and not moving. But she wasn't fighting to throw it off. She was holding on. Her stubbed claws had hooked into the mite's plating, and she was simply staying there, taking the weight, taking the contact, while the slow tide turned. The laughter went on. Then it stuttered. Because the mite had stopped pressing down. It sat on top of her, but its legs had begun to tremble, then to stiffen. Its furious scuttling slowed to twitches. Its plated shell, which had gleamed, went dull and chalky, like something left out in the sun for a season. The crowd quieted, confused, watching the wrong beast weaken. Lyra rolled out from under it. The mite tried to follow and couldn't. Its joints had locked stiff, frozen mid-step. A beast turned to a statue of itself. Lyra stood over it, breathing hard, and along her gray hide her 2 horn stubs had pushed out into real spurs, sharper, longer than they'd been that morning. She had taken the mite's strength, and she'd taken something else, because when she stepped, one of her own back legs locked for a heartbeat, stiff-jointed, the exact trick that had frozen the mite, flickering through her like a stolen reflex before she shook it off. She had not just won. She had kept a piece of it. The yard was silent. Then someone laughed, too loudly. Bren, forcing it. A defective mite, he announced. Bred wrong. Look at it. It can barely stand. The boy didn't win. The beast simply failed. He waved a hand. Cull it. Bring something that actually works. He explained it away. He had to. But I watched his eyes while he did it, and under the easy contempt there was something new and small and uncertain. He had expected to laugh at me. Instead, he'd had to invent a reason for what he'd seen. That uncertainty was worth more to me than the win. I should have been glad. Instead, my hands were shaking, and not with triumph. She had been pinned. She had been under that thing, taking blow after blow, and I had made myself sit and watch because I needed her to grow. My fear had changed shape somewhere in those 3 seconds. It was no longer, I will be humiliated again. It was, Lyra could be hurt because I need her to be hurt. That was a worse thing to carry, and I carried it down into the sand and gathered her up and felt how her flanks heaved. You did it, I whispered. You did it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. The pulse answered, tired but steady, as if to say, again. That answer frightened me more than the fight had. She wasn't afraid. She'd been pinned and beaten, and she'd come up wanting the next one, because each one made her more. I was the one shaking. I had told myself in the washroom that I would never treat her like a tool. And here I was already, sitting on my hands while a thing I'd promised to protect took blows so that I could meet a deadline. I held her tighter and made myself look at that ugly truth and not flinch from it. If we were going to do this, I had to do it with my eyes open. The cost was going to be hers as much as mine, and pretending otherwise would only get her killed. Bren did not let me leave. Since the beast is so capable, he called with a thin smile, let's give it a real lesson. Clear the mite. Bring the Ironbeak. A murmur went through the trainers. An Ironbeak is not a nursery beast. It is a raptor the size of a man, all blade feathers and a beak that can shear through a shield. And its gift is the cutting wind it throws from its wings. A slash you cannot block because it has no edge to catch. Worse, Bren ordered the pit pressure raised, the barrier walls drawn in tight, the sand floor narrowed so there was nowhere to run and nowhere to circle. He had learned one thing from the mite. He wanted no time. A fast beast in a small pit would end this before any slow tide could turn. He had almost understood. Almost. Suho, a stable hand at the rail, an older one, muttered it without looking at me. Boy, that bird'll open her up. Forfeit. Take the loss. No, I said. They loosed the Ironbeak. The cage door slammed up and the thing exploded out of it. I had seen Ironbeaks at a distance, trained ones, leashed. I had never been close to one loosed in anger. It was worse than I'd imagined. A storm of gray blades with a screaming red eye, and the air around it sang where the cutting wind sheared. The crowd went up in a roar. Some of them were already laughing, certain this was the moment the runt died and the maid's boy learned his place at last. It came off the ground in a scream of metal feathers and threw its first cutting wind before Lyra had even turned. The slash caught her across the shoulder and opened a line of dark blood, and she staggered, and the crowd leaned in, hungry again. Another slash. Another. She couldn't reach it. It stayed high, raining those edgeless cuts, and the small pit that was meant to trap her was keeping her from the one thing she needed. Contact. Get under it, I shouted, all restraint gone now. Lyra, don't chase it. Wait for it to dive. It has to come down to kill. Let it. She heard me. She stopped trying to leap and made herself small and still in the center of the sand, bleeding, swaying, looking finished. Looking like prey. The Ironbeak folded its wings and dropped to end it. And Lyra moved. Not away. Into it. She took the dive full on, took the beak through her hide, and got her claws hooked deep into the bird's chest, and then she simply would not let go. The Ironbeak shrieked and beat its wings and threw cutting wind at point-blank range, shredding the sand, and Lyra held on through all of it while the slow tide turned in the only direction it ever turned. The bird's screaming thinned. Its metal feathers lost their shine. The cutting wind it threw grew weaker, then ragged, then stopped, and its great wings sagged and folded and hung limp, the strength pulled clean out of them. It slumped into the sand, hollow, a husk in the shape of a raptor. Lyra rose off it, torn and bleeding and bigger than she had been an hour ago. And along the new spurs of her horns, where there had been only gray bone, a thin silver line had appeared and was crawling slowly outward. the same sheen the iron beak's blade feathers had carried, the cutting edge itself. Bank now in her, hers to throw. The yard made no sound at all. Even Bren had no joke ready. I climbed down into the pit and knelt in the bloodied sand and put my hands on her, and I felt the silver edge humming faint along her horns. And I understood with a cold clarity that the deadline was no longer my enemy. Every lesson Bren ordered, every beast he threw at her to make me small, she would take apart and keep. He thought he was teaching me to fail. The blood hadn't dried on the pit sand before my father had a steward read me the new rule. I stood in the lower stable corridor with Lyra leaning against my leg, both of us still torn from the iron beak, and the steward held up a slate like it was a writ of law. By order of the house, he recited, no ward is to conduct private training of any beast. All beasts within House Dorn's walls are house property, to be handled only under sanctioned supervision. He lowered the slate. That includes yours, boy. The runt eats house feed and breathes house air. It is ours to permit or to take. There it was. They'd seen the iron beak go hollow and they hadn't understood it, but they'd understood that something was happening in my hands that they hadn't authorized, and House Dorn's answer to anything it didn't control was always the same. Make it property. Make it theirs. Understood, I said, and gave him nothing, and watched the small uncertainty flicker over his face the way it had flickered over Bren's. The rule was meant to starve us. No private training meant no quiet hours, no dead cores fed in secret, no way to build Lyra up where they couldn't see. They'd cut off her food, so I went and volunteered for the one job in House Dorn that no trueborn would touch. The sealed stalls. When a trained beast died of sickness or a core rotted past use, the remains were quarantined and cleaned out by hand. Filthy, dangerous work, the leavings of dead monsters scraped and hauled and burned. The kind of work they gave the maid's boy as punishment. I asked for it. The stable master looked at me like I'd lost my mind and signed me to it without a second thought. Because why would anyone question a ward begging for the worst job in the house? He didn't see what I saw. Every sealed stall was full of cast-off cores. Spent ones, rotted ones, cracked ones, worthless to House Dorn, every one of them still holding a last dim thread of beast power. Food. They had taken Lyra's feed away and then handed me a job that was nothing but feed because they could only see the filth and never the strength buried in it. It became our ladder. Each night I'd haul a sealed stall's worth of dead cores to the burn pit, and each night, in a few unwatched minutes before the fire, Lyra would drain them dry. The low-status work they'd given me to break me had become a repeatable route to power. I almost felt grateful to them. Almost. I learned the rhythm of it. The dead cores were weak, each one a thin meal, but there were so many of them, and the count adds up. A finger's width of growth, a night. A little more depth in her breathing. The horn spurs lengthening so slowly that no one who saw her daily would notice, only someone like me who watched her in the dark and measured. I kept a tally scratched into the underside of a feed trough where no one would look. Cores drained. Nights passed. Days until the hunt. 3 columns of numbers, the only ledger that mattered, and the gap between the second and the third was the thing that kept me awake. The work itself was vile. I won't pretend it wasn't. I came up from the sealed stalls each dawn smelling of death, my hands cracked, my back bent. And I'd pass true-born heirs in the corridor who held their sleeves to their noses and said nothing, because I was beneath even mockery now. Let them, I thought. Let them think the maid's boy had finally found his level. Every insult was a door they weren't watching, and behind it Lyra grew. Bren found out within the week, not the truth. He never got the truth, not yet, but he heard the maid's boy was hauling cast-off cores, and that was enough to make him want to poison the well. I knew something was wrong the moment I opened the 6th stall. There was a core in it that didn't belong. The others were gray, spent, honest in their deadness. Oh, oh! This one pulsed. A sick green pulse. Oily, wrong. A thorn wasp core, and not a dead one. Thorn wasps carry venom in their cores even after death, and this one had been left to rot just enough to turn that venom toxic, then planted where I'd be sure to find it and feed it to Lyra. Bren's friends, I learned later, had said it. A gift wrapped in poison. I should have left it. Any sane handler would have left it, but Lyra had already smelled the power in it. She strained toward it, that bottomless want pulling at her, and I understood the choice in front of me. The thorn wasp core was strong, far stronger than the spent cast-offs. If she could drain it, it would be the biggest meal she'd had. And it might kill her doing it. Slow, I whispered, and set my hands on her and let her take it. The first moments were fine. The tide turned, the green pulse dimmed, the core's power began to flow into her. Then the venom came with it. Lyra convulsed. Her whole body seized, Her legs kicked out. A sound came out of her I had never heard, thin and terrible. The green light didn't fade clean. It sank under her scales and spread, glowing through her hide in branching veins, the poison riding in on the back of the power. She was draining it and being drained at once. I could have pulled her off. That was the choice. Yank her back from the core, lose the meal, lose the training time, but maybe save her from the venom. Bren's whole sabotage worked only if I cared more about her growing than about her living. And I found, with her seizing under my hands, that I didn't have to think about it at all. "I've got you," I said, and I didn't pull her off. I held her. I kept my hands flat on her shaking flanks, and I kept the contact steady so the drain wouldn't break mid-pull and leave the poison in her with no power coming through to burn it out. "Take it slow. All of it. I'm not going anywhere. Longer, Lyra. Hold on longer." The green veins under her scales pulsed, crawled, and then, slowly, began to recede because she was winning. She was pulling the venom apart into power, the same way she pulled everything apart, given enough time and a hand to steady her. The convulsions eased. The glow faded from her hide. The thorn-wasp core in front of us went black and dead and crumbled to ash. For a long, terrible stretch, I thought I'd guessed wrong. The convulsions came in waves, each one worse, and there was a moment, I'll be honest, when every sane instinct in me screamed to tear her off the core and let the meal go. Lose the power. Save the beast. That was the trade Bren's friends had built. They'd bet that I'd either let her die rather than waste a meal, or waste the meal and stay weak. Either way, they won. And kneeling in the dark with her shaking apart under my hands, I understood that the whole sabotage was really aimed at me, at what kind of man I'd be when no one was watching. "Stay with me," I said, over and over, my voice the only steady thing in that stall. "I'm not letting go. We finish it together or not at all." "Longer, Lyra, just a little longer." Lyra lay still, breathing, alive, and under her gray scales something new had grown, a layer of hard, dark, interlocking plates, jointed like a wasp's armor. The thorn wasp's defense made hers. It showed through her hide in dull ridges. It also marked her. Anyone who saw that armor would know she'd taken something she shouldn't have. I worked fast. I scooped handfuls of cold ash from the burn pit and smeared it over her, gray over the dark plates, until she looked like nothing but a filthy runt that had been rolling in cinders. By the time the stable hands came through on their dawn round, there was only a sick-looking gray beast asleep in the ash and a ward dutifully hauling dead cores. The stable hands had begun to talk, though. I heard them. "Another core gone hollow," one muttered to another. "Third, this week, in the sealed stalls. And that iron beak from the yard, they say it came back empty as a gourd." They didn't know what it meant, but they were counting. The pattern was building, hollowed core after hollowed core, and patterns get noticed. It got noticed enough that an official came down. The registrar's clerk sent to appraise whether the runt was somehow tampering with house property. He stood Lyra up, ash-gray, dull-eyed, slumped, and ran his appraisal over her, the cold measuring stare they'd run over me 100 times. "No native power," he pronounced. "Bored. No innate ability of any class. A defective runt. Whatever's hollowing the cores, it isn't this. Cores rot. Beasts die. The ward is simply assigned to the rot." He left. I almost laughed again. They had looked straight at her, plated with stolen thorn armor, humming with drained power, and their appraisal had read no native power, because it was true. She owned nothing. Every scrap of her strength was taken, and their instruments only measured what a thing was born with. The lie that protected us was simply the truth they refused to understand. The work earned me one more thing. After a month of sealed stall labor, the stable master, half to reward me and half to keep the cheap labor coming, granted me a kennel token. 1 sanctioned training pit hour per day, not freedom, supervised, logged, an hour at the master's pleasure, but a legal door into the pits where real opponents were kept. Bren's friends arranged a welcome. The first day, my token let me into the pits. 3 of them were waiting at the rail with a beast already loaded into the deep sand pit. A sandworm, long and burrowing, blind but deadly underground. The kind of beast that fights by vanishing beneath you and striking from below where you can't see it. "Try your token out, Ward," one called down, grinning. "Show us the famous runt. A sandworm should have been a death sentence. You can't hold contact with something that won't stay above ground." 2 of you against the maid's boy and his lizard," I said, loud enough for the rail. "Does Bren know you're using up his beasts on me, or is this a surprise for him too?" The grin slipped a little. "Good." I'd learned that much. They hated being reminded that every match they forced was a match Bren would have to explain. They thought they were the ones spending my dignity. They never counted what they were spending, but Lyra had thorn armor now. And she had patience. I knelt at the pit's edge and spoke low. It'll go under. You can't chase it down there blind. So don't chase. Anchor. Make it come to you. She'd taken so much by now that I trusted her to take the meaning even when she couldn't take every word. She walked to the center of the pit and drove her clawed feet down, and the thorn armor extruded, dark plates spreading down her legs and into the sand, anchoring her like roots. The sandworm struck from below and slammed into that anchored, armored body and could not knock her loose. It struck again. The thorns held. And while it struck, she took. The worm's first gift came fast because the contact was deep and constant. A strange new sense bled into Lyra, and I saw it happen. Saw her head tilt and track the worm even after it dove and vanished, following it through solid ground. Burrow sense. She could feel it moving under the sand now, the way it felt her. The hunter's own gift turned against it. The next time it dove, she dove after it. She went under the sand and the whole pit shuddered, and when the surface broke, it was Lyra who came up first, with the sandworm clamped in her thorned claws, already going hollow. Its long body slackening as the tide turned and emptied it out. She'd struck first, underground, blind, using the worm's own sense to find the worm. Bren's friends had stopped grinning. She climbed out of the empty pit, leaving the husk behind, and she was bigger again, and the burrow sense and the thorn armor and the cutting edge and the stiff joint trick were all in her now, stacking, combining. A whole arsenal built from every beast they'd thrown at me to watch me lose. I knelt and put my hand on her, breathing hard, prouder than I'd ever let my face show. And in the quiet of the empty pit, for the first time, something came across the bond that wasn't just a pulse. But word, faint, shaped, unmistakable, pressed into my chest from the inside the way the heartbeat had been, but with meaning now, with a voice almost in it. Longer. She understood the strategy. She was telling me how to win. The whole engine of what we were, distilled into one word from a beast that wasn't supposed to be able to give me any. I sat on the rim of the empty sand pit that night and counted the dead. A straw mite, an ironbeak, a thornwasp core, a sandworm. Cast-off cores beyond counting. Every one of them hollowed, husked, drained, and every one of them on a list somewhere, in some steward's ledger, marked beast lost or core expended. The stable hands were counting too. The clerk had come once already. And the word longer, still warm in my chest, could not change the cold arithmetic that had just occurred to me. Each win made Lyra easier to see. I had been so busy feeding her that I'd missed the danger. It wasn't losing anymore. It was being noticed. A runt that hollows everything it touches is a curiosity. A runt that hollows everything it touches and keeps growing is a thing Housethorn would study and cage, and if they ever understood it, destroy. Recognition could get her killed. I felt that for the first time as a real weight, the cost sitting down on my chest beside the deadline. That was the trap of the whole strategy, and I saw it clearly for the first time that night on the pit rim. Every win made her stronger, and every win made her more visible, and strength and visibility pulled in opposite directions. The thing I needed to survive the hunt was the same thing that would get her condemned before the hunt ever came. I couldn't stop winning. I couldn't keep hiding. Somewhere, those two lines crossed, and on the far side of that crossing was a Housethorn that finally understood what it had handed me, and a Lyra it would never let live. I made myself remember, that night on the rim, exactly what we were grinding toward. The hunt was not a contest for a ribbon. It decided who ruled Housethorn. The winner's word became law. The whole family fortune passed to his hand, and he could cast out any name he chose. My father, the elders, Bren, all of them, put out the way they had always threatened to put out me. That was the prize I was building Lyra toward, drained core by drained core. And the other side of it never left my mind either. They had sworn it in the hall, in front of everyone. The day I lost, I was struck from the bloodline and turned out onto the street. Win, and I held the whole house in my fist. Lose, and I had nothing, not even a roof. There was no middle ground they'd left me. Every dim core Lyra emptied was a step toward one end of that or the other. So I needed her safe on paper before they understood her, in fact. I needed a law between her and them. The trouble was that every law in Housethorn belonged to the people who hated me. I lay awake working it like a trial problem, turning their rules over in the dark, looking for the one place where their contempt had left a door unlocked. Bren felt it too, in his own way. He'd noticed his lessons weren't producing the humiliation he paid for. So he changed tactics. If he couldn't beat the runt in the pit, he'd erase it on paper. He bribed the beast registrar. I learned it from a clerk who owed me nothing but disliked Bren more. The registrar himself was coming to formally inspect Lyra before the succession hunt roster closed, and the inspection was bought. Bren wanted Lyra struck from the roster as ineligible, or condemned as defective, or simply branded worthless on the official record so that whatever I did with her would never count. The inspection happened in the appraisal hall, with Bren present, lounging against a pillar with his arms crossed and that old waiting smile. The registrar was a thin, precise man with instruments hung from his belt, and he ran every one of them over Lyra while I stood and said nothing. No native power, he said at last, and I'd heard those words before, but he wasn't finished. No innate ability of any recognized class. No latent core signature. No bonded element. By every measure of this office, this animal is a powerless husk. It has nothing. He turned to me with the contempt of a man being paid to deliver it. Whatever delusion you've built around this creature, Ward, the record will show the truth. A runt with no power, a boy with no beast. You will field nothing at the hunt, because you have nothing. Bren laughed. The clerks laughed. Delusional, Bren said, savoring it. He thinks his dead-made son's luck will hold. He thinks the rot beast is special. He pushed off the pillar. Mark it down. Mark all of it. Worthless. Let the whole house read it. I let him have it. That was the strange thing I'd learned, kneeling in trash and washrooms and sealed stalls, that an insult only has the power you fight it with. Bren needed me to flinch. The registrar needed me to argue, to plead, to give him something to deny. So I gave them a blank face and a bowed head and let the word delusional roll off me, and I watched it disappoint them. Watched them reach for a bigger cruelty because the first one hadn't fed them. There is a kind of power in being underestimated that the powerful can never hold, because they have too much to protect. I had nothing left to protect but her, and she was already written down as worthless. The insult landed exactly where he aimed it. Delusional, the maid's boy and his garbage beast. I felt my face want to go hot, and I held it cold instead because under the sting, something else had just clicked into place. They had said it themselves, officially. On the record, no power. Worthless, a husk. And Housedorn law had a name for a worthless beast. Then I claimed the worthless beast exemption, I said. The hall went quiet. The registrar blinked. The exemption is an old, dusty clause, written to spare destitute servants for being charged stabling fees for beasts too weak to be worth anything. A charity rule, a pity rule. No one had invoked it in years because no one wanted to be the person who needed it. You can't be serious, the registrar said. You've recorded her as worthless, I said. No native power. A husk. By your own appraisal, she qualifies. Under the exemption, a beast formally declared without value cannot be charged leasing or stabling fees and cannot be seized for house debt. I kept my voice flat. I'm keeping her, and you're going to stamp the document that lets me. Bren's smile flickered. He hadn't seen that coming. He'd wanted her branded worthless to take her from me, and I'd just used the brand to nail her to me where his debts and fees couldn't reach. The registrar looked at Bren, looked at me, and stamped the exemption, because the law was the law, and there was nothing in it he could refuse. I had swallowed the humiliation and turned it into armor. It felt better than any pit win, but Housedorn never gives without taking. The registrar read the rest of the clause aloud as he stamped it, and the rest of the clause had teeth. Be advised, he said, with a thin returning smile of his own, that a beast held under the worthless beast exemption is subject to house monitoring. A tracking tag will be affixed. The tag reports all sanctioned engagements to this office so that the house may confirm the exempt beast remains. He chose the word with relish, worthless. They clamped the tag onto Lyra's foreleg, a flat iron band that glowed faintly, warm to the touch, watching. Every sanctioned fight she entered, the tag would report. They'd built me a leash and a spy in the same breath. The false relief of the exemption curdled. I'd protected her ownership and handed them a window straight into her. Bren left satisfied again. He thought the tag would catch her failing, fight after logged fight, and bury us in a paper trail of losses. I walked Lyra back down to the stables, turning the clause over in my head. A tracking tag that reports all sanctioned engagements. It monitored fights, which meant it assumed there would be fights, which meant the house had just put in writing that an exempt, monitored beast was expected to engage, and the office was expected to oversee it. By the time I reached the stalls, I had it. The next morning I went to the steward and made my demand in the language of their own rule. The exemption requires house monitoring of all my beast's sanctioned engagements, I said. I can't be monitored if I'm not given sanctioned engagements. I'm requesting daily monitored practice opponents, as is my right under an active exemption, so the office can keep its record current. The steward sputtered. He took it to the registrar's office. The registrar, trapped by his own clause, could not refuse without admitting the monitoring was a sham, and Bren, who'd paid for that monitoring, couldn't argue against it without exposing the bribe. The house posted a daily opponent board, my name on it. A monitored match, every day, against whatever beast the schedule turned up. The registrar realized too late what he'd agreed to. I watched it cross his face the moment the steward read the posting back. The understanding that the exempt, monitored beast he'd meant to catch failing would now be guaranteed a fresh opponent every single day. Delivered and logged by the office's own hand. He opened his mouth to object and found there was nothing to object to. The clause was his. The monitoring was his. He'd built the cage, and now he couldn't explain why the prisoner kept thanking him for it. This is absurd, he managed. The exemption was never meant to. The exemption means what it says, I told him. You read it to me yourself. They thought they were watching me fail on a schedule. They had just built me a feeding machine. A guaranteed opponent every single day, delivered by House Dorn's own hand, logged and legal and impossible to refuse. The rule trap had become a feeding ladder with a roof and a timetable. The cost sat with me even so. The tag glowed on Lyra's leg, watching, and every logged fight was a line in a record that someone, someday, might read closely enough to understand. I had bought us a steady supply of prey at the price of being permanently observed. Each upgrade still endangered her. That weight didn't lift. It just changed shape. The first scheduled opponent on the new board came from the outer practice fields where the rival heirs trained, a beast leant over for the monitored match. A mirror elk. A mirror elk is a strange beast, more trick than threat. It throws glamour, a shimmer that wraps it in false images, doubling and tripling itself, showing you a stag where there's only mist, so you strike at nothing while it strikes at you. Hard to catch, easy to lose. But once you have hold of it, like everything else, it was only a thing full of power waiting to be taken. The outer practice fields were grander than the sunken yard, open ground under a wide sky with the rival heirs' pavilions along one edge. These were not House Dorn's people. These were the sons and daughters of the houses my anonymous summons would later reach, and they had come out of idle curiosity to see the famous worthless runt that House Dorn couldn't stop talking about. They expected a joke. I intended to give them a memory instead. Wait for the real one, I told Lyra at the field's edge. The rival heirs had come to watch, lounging and skeptical, expecting the ash-gray runt to flail at phantoms. The glamours can't touch you. Only the body can. Hold still. Make it commit. She stood in the false herd of flickering elk and waited, the way she'd waited for the Ironbeak's dive, the way she'd anchored against the worm. The mirror elk circled, multiplied, fainted. She didn't move. And when the real one finally lunged, she had it, thorns out, anchored, contact made, and the slow tide turning. The glamour was the meal this time. The false images shivered and thinned as the power left the elk, the herd of phantoms collapsing back into one dull, hollowing beast. And the shimmer didn't vanish. It crawled off the elk and onto Lyra, and then, because she had taken it, because it was hers now to wear, off Lyra and onto me. I felt it settle over my shoulders like a second skin. I looked down. My torn servant's coat, the twice-mended thing they'd dressed me in to mark me as less, shimmered and reshaped, not changing cloth but changing how the eye read it. The set of my shoulders, the line of the coat, the way the light fell. For one long moment I did not look like a maid's boy in rags. I looked like an heir. I looked, exactly, like the dragon-chosen son House Dorn had tried to erase. The rival heirs at the rail stopped lounging. I felt the change in the air more than saw it. A field that had been full of bored, smirking witnesses went quiet and sharp. Someone at the rail said my name, not the maid's boy, not the ward, my name, Suho, as a question, as if recalculating. That was the real prize, worth more than the elk's clamor itself. Not the trick of looking like an heir. The fact that, for the length of a breath, people who'd been raised to despise me had to stop and wonder if they'd been wrong about who I was. The skeptical smiles slid off their faces. One of them stood up. The glamour wouldn't hold. It was Lyra's stolen trait, not a fact about me, and it would fade. But in that moment, on that field, they were not looking at the maid's boy they'd come to laugh at. They were looking at something that wore command like it was born to it, and they did not know what to do with that. Bren stopped trying to make me look weak the day the rival heirs saw me look strong. He went to my father instead, and I wasn't meant to hear it, but the air wing walls are thin where the servants polish them, and I was polishing them. He's making us a spectacle, Bren was saying, all the lazy contempt gone, replaced with something tighter. Rival houses are talking about the ward and his runt. People are asking questions about the awakening. Every day that boy stands in the pits is a day. House Dorn looks unstable, like the succession is in doubt. A pause. He needs to be put back in his place where no one's watching. Quietly. And how would you suggest that, my father said, without making the spectacle worse? The deep trial cavern, Bren said. Send him to clear it. Frame it as a chance to prove his gratitude. No crowd, no witnesses. If the runt's as special as they whisper, let it prove that in the dark where it can't help him. I went still against the wall, the trial cavern. Every heir knew of it, and none went down willingly. It was the old proving ground under the mountain, sealed for years, full of beasts that had bred wild in the dark. You went in alone, no backup. Some heirs in the old days had not come out. My father called me up that same afternoon. He did not say any of what Bren had said. He framed it exactly as Bren had told him to. You've been eager to prove your worth, he said, signing the order without looking at me. Here's your chance. The deep cavern needs clearing. Do it, and the house will see you've earned your keep. Refuse, and we'll know your gratitude was always empty. He slid the slate across. Consider it a gift, Suho. A chance to show us all what you are. A chance to prove gratitude. They had a phrase for everything they did to me. I took the slate, because refusing was the one thing that would end us faster than the cavern could. I knew it was a trap. That was the part my father never understood about me. He thought framing the cavern as a gift would make me grateful or blind, and it made me neither. A man who has been handed nothing but punishments dressed as kindness learns to read the dressing. The cavern was Bren's hand wearing my father's glove. No witnesses, no backup. A place where the runt could die in the dark, and the report would say only that the ward had failed his trial. I went anyway, because the alternative was forfeit, and forfeit was the one death I couldn't come back from. But I went with my eyes open, and I went having drained every spare core I could find the night before, topping Lyra up like a lamp before a long dark. The cavern mouth breathed cold air that smelled of old stone and older blood. I went down with Lyra at my side, a single lantern, and a tag glowing faintly on her leg. Even here it watched. The dark closed over us. The descent was long. The lantern threw our shadows huge against walls that sweated cold water, and the deeper we went, the older the stone felt, the carvings on it worn past reading. This was a place from before House Dorn's grand pavilions and powdered elders, from an age when the proving of an heir meant something harder than a sunken yard of raked sand. I felt the weight of all that age pressing down through the rock, and I kept one hand on Lyra's flank the whole way, partly to steady her and partly to steady me. And almost at once, I heard the sound that everyone who'd survived the cavern described, and no one could forget, a dry, rushing, clicking tide, like rain made of knives. Blade centipedes, they came out of the walls. Not one, not 10, a swarm, hundreds of them, each as long as my arm, segmented and bladed, pouring over the rock in a living flood. The lantern light caught 1,000 moving edges. The sound of them was the worst part, that dry clicking rush filling the whole chamber, coming from every direction at once, so there was no wall to put your back against and no direction to run. And I understood our problem instantly, the cold, flat clarity arriving the way it always did when there was no time for anything else. Lyra drained one thing at a time. She needed contact, and the longer she held it, the more she took. But you cannot hold a swarm, you cannot drain a flood. They split into 100 targets, and each one she seized was one of 100 more, and it would simply cover her and cut her to pieces while she fed on a single segment. Anchor, I shouted over the rushing clicks. Thorn armor, wide as you can, let them come to you. She drove down, and the thorn armor spread, and this time she didn't try to grip one centipede. She let them swarm her, let them climb the armor, let them pour over the plates, and the plates were contact. Every blade centipede that touched the thorn armor to cut at it was touching her, was held, was draining. She turned her one great weakness into the trap. The swarm couldn't split her focus because she wasn't focusing on any single one of them. She was draining all of them at once through the armor they were trying to climb. The flood thinned. Centipedes dropped off her hollow and curled, husked. But for every one that fell, 2 more came, and I saw the truth. The swarm was endless because it had a source. Somewhere in the dark, it had a queen. Burrow sense, I called. Find the big one. It's underground. Feel for it. Lyra's head came up, tracking, the sandworm's gift sweeping the rock beneath us. She turned toward the deep wall and lunged, tearing through the bladed tide, and I ran behind her through the gap, her armored body opened. She hit the wall, and her claws went into it and dragged out something vast and pale and writhing. The Swarm Queen, bloated and ancient, the heart of the flood. This was the meal. She locked onto it, thorns deep, and held and would not let go, and the slow tide turned against the biggest thing in that dark. The queen shrieked, and the whole swarm shrieked with it. And as the queen went hollow, slowly, slowly, the pale bulk caving inward, something broke through Lyra's skull. A second crown of horns, pushing up through her scales beside the first, longer, sharper, a whole new stage of her rising as the queen went down. The swarm, severed from its source, scattered and died across the cavern floor. The dark went quiet, except for Lyra's breathing, deep and ragged. She'd grown again. I could see it even by lantern light, the new crown heavy on her, the old spurs longer, her whole frame filled out from the half-grown thing they'd handed me in a crate. She was becoming something. I didn't have the word for it yet. The cavern was about to give me the word, and I was going to wish it hadn't. I lifted the lantern, and that was when I saw the plaque. It was set into the deep wall the queen had nested against, a slab of black stone, old beyond the rest of the cavern, carved with worn glyphs. I could read enough of the old hand to feel my blood go cold. It was a warning. It spoke of a kind of beast that owned no power and took all power, that grew without ceiling by devouring, that had been hunted in an age before Housedorn and culled, that word, culled, before maturity. Every time, without exception, because a thing that only takes cannot be allowed to finish growing. Devourers must be culled before maturity. I stood there with the lantern shaking in my hand and understood three things at once. That Lyra was not unique, there had been others, long ago. That the world had a name for what she was, and a sentence to go with it. And that if I reported this, if I handed it to the registrar or the elders or any of the institutions that might finally validate everything I'd seen, the validation would come with an executioner. I looked at the plaque. I looked at Lyra, blood-streaked and twice crowned, leaning her exhausted weight against my leg, sending a tired pulse across the bond. It was the hardest the choice had ever been, and it took me less than a breath. Because here, finally, was the thing I'd wanted since the basin went still, proof. Hard, ancient, undeniable proof that I had not been imagining what I'd seen in the trash yard, that Lyra was real and rare and exactly as extraordinary as I knew. A scholar would have wept over this plaque. An honest house would have studied it. And every institution that could finally tell me I was right would, in the same breath, read the same word I'd just read and reach for the cull. So this was the test, the real one, deeper than any pit. Did I want to be believed, or did I want to keep her? They were not the same thing. They might never be the same thing. I broke a shard off the plaque's edge and put it in my coat. I told no one. I would tell no one. The institutions that might prove I was right were the same ones that would kill her for it, and I had made a choice somewhere back in a washroom on a wet floor, and the choice held. I trusted her more than I trusted being believed. That was when I heard the boots, light, descending, more than one set, and not the careless tread of stable hands. Hunters, Bren's hunters, coming down under the cover of rescue, coming to find out what had happened to the runt in the dark where there were no witnesses to manage. Or to make sure nothing came out at all. My blood went cold, then hot. This was the second half of the tramp. Send the maid's boy into the dark, then send armed men down after him to make sure the dark kept whatever it took. If Lyra had died to the swarm, they'd have hauled out a body and a sad report. If she hadn't, if she'd done exactly what she'd done, they were here to see it, and a thing that's seen can't stay secret. Their light swung into the chamber and across Lyra, and I saw the moment they saw her. 2 crowns of horns, thorn armor, the husked queen behind her, the silver edge along her older spurs. Powers no runt should wear, all of it lit up at once in the lantern glare. One of the hunters swore. Another reached for a horn to signal back up the shaft. "Stay back," I said, stepping in front of her, which was absurd, a stable-worn boy with no weapon between armed hunters and the most dangerous beast in the mountain. But I said it anyway, and I meant it. "She cleared your cavern. The trial's done." "We're walking out." "That's not a runt," one of them said, low, almost frightened. "What in all the dark is that?" "Mine," I said. "She's mine, Lyra," I said. "We're leaving. Now." She was spent. She'd poured nearly everything into the queen and the swarm. But she put herself between me and the hunters, and she spent what little she had left to do it. Not to drain them, there was no time and no contact, but to shield me. A shadow rose off her in the lantern light, vast and dark, the swarm shadow of all those husked centipedes thrown up like a wall of writhing dark between us and the hunter's lights. They flinched back from it. We ran. We made the long shaft up toward the cavern mouth, the cold air pulling at us, the hunter's lights swinging behind. And in the last stretch, with the gray daylight of the exit ahead and Lyra staggering at my side, the lantern caught her shadow against the cavern wall. It was not a beast shadow. For one heartbeat, one single heartbeat, the shadow Lyra cast on the stone was the shadow of a woman. Tall, crowned with the same horns but standing, shaped human, an arm lifted and reaching back toward me with an open hand, as if to take mine. I stopped breathing. Then she stumbled, the lantern swung, and the shadow was a beast's again, gray and four-legged and exhausted. But I had seen it. The empty thing they'd handed me in a crate was becoming something with a hand to reach back. We came out of the cavern into gray light, and the prize core was sitting right there at the mouth, and I walked past it. The trial cavern paid out a bounty for whoever cleared it. The Swarm Queen's core, if he brought it up, was worth a fortune and a mark of honor on the house record. It lay there in the rubble where the queen had nested, the one clean thing I could have carried out to prove I'd done what they sent me to do. My father would have had to acknowledge it. The bounty would have bought us breathing room. But Lyra couldn't walk. She was collapsing against my leg, spent to the bone, the two crowns of horns too heavy for her to lift. I could carry the core, or I could carry her. For one moment I stood over the core and let myself want it. It would have changed everything above ground. With the queen's core in my hands, my father would have had to stand in front of the house and name what I'd done. The bounty would have bought us months. Bren's whole story, that the maid's boy was a failure clinging to garbage, would have cracked in public. It was the easiest, cleanest win on offer, and all it asked was that I set down the exhausted thing at my feet and pick up the prize instead. That was exactly why I left it. Because I knew, with the cold, flat certainty that had carried me since the basin, that the day I started choosing the prize over her was the day I became my father. He had taught me what a person is worth when you measure them by their use. I had decided in a washroom that I would never do that arithmetic. The cavern was just the bill coming due. I knelt and gathered her up in both arms and left the core in the dark. No speech, no declaration. I just left a fortune on the stone and carried the runt up into the daylight, and the hunters who'd followed us out watched me do it, and I didn't care what they made of it. The cost was right there, visible, the bounty I'd thrown away to hold her. That was the whole answer to anyone who still thought she was a tool. My father was waiting at the air wing gate. He'd heard the hunters report that the runt had survived, that something strange was down there. He looked at Lyra in my arms and at my empty hands where the core should have been, and he made his move. The clean one, the tempting one. "You've made your point," he said, almost gently, the way he'd never spoken to me in my life. "You've proven you can endure. Enough now. Surrender the runt to the house as unstable property. It nearly died down there. Anyone can see. It's a danger. And your room in the air wing is restored. Your stipend. Your place at this family's table. Come back inside, Suho. Be my son again. All it costs is one defective beast." And there it was. Everything I'd wanted since I was old enough to understand, I'd been born wrong. The room, the name spoken like it meant something. My father calling me son with something that almost sounded like warmth. For the price of one beast that everyone agreed was worthless. I felt the old hunger for it rise up, the lifelong ache to be let in. And then I felt Lyra's heartbeat against my chest, tired and trusting, and the ache simply went out, like a core going dark under her mouth. "No," I said, his face closed. "Think carefully. I have." I held her tighter. "You taught me what your table costs." "I'm not paying it again." "Then you've made your choice," he said, and the gentleness was gone like it had never been. "Airwing access is revoked, permanently. You'll sleep with the beasts, since you love them so much. Don't come to this gate again." He turned, and the gate closed, and that door, the one I'd spent my whole life trying to be let through, shut for good. I should have felt the loss. Mostly, I felt lighter. That night, I did something I'd been planning since the appraisal hall. The registrar kept a memory crystal in his office. The instruments his office used recorded their appraisals, and one of them had been running at the awakening, as all official ceremonies were recorded. If anything had captured Bren pressing his air ring into my forming bond, it would be there. I'd marked the crystal's place during the inspection. Now, with the air wing emptying for the night, I went and took it. I'd thought about this for weeks. The instruments his office used to appraise beasts recorded what they measured, and great ceremonies were recorded as a matter of law, so the line of succession could never be disputed. The irony of that was almost too rich. The very recording meant to protect the bloodline's purity had caught the bloodline's heir committing theft. The elders had never thought to destroy it because it had never occurred to them that the maid's boy might one day have a use for the truth. It was almost too easy. The registrar trusted his locks more than his sense. I held the crystal in my hand in the dark of his office and turned it, and a small light woke in it, and I saw, faint but unmistakable, the awakening hall. The dragon answering my blood, the bond forming, the thread of heat running to my torn palm. And Bren stepping in, pressing the ring, speaking his name over mine while the bond was still soft. Proof, absolute proof in my hand that the theft was a theft. Every instinct screamed to run to the elders with it. To the rival houses. To anyone. Burn Bren down tonight. Not yet. I made myself put the screaming down and think. If I played this now, in private, to the elders who'd already called the theft justice, they would bury it. They'd seize the crystal as stolen house property, which it was, and brand me a thief, and the proof would vanish into a vault. House Dorn controlled every audience I could reach inside these walls. Proof was worthless. Without a crowd, they couldn't silence. So I would wait. I would hold it until the succession hunt, when rival houses and adjudicators from outside would be watching, when House Dorn could not make it disappear. The proof would be a weapon, not a tantrum. Not yet. It was the hardest discipline of my life, holding that crystal and not using it. Every night since the awakening, I'd imagined the moment I'd prove the theft. And here it was in my hand, and I had to put it back in my coat and wait, because a weapon fired at the wrong target is just noise. The crystal was worth nothing in a room House Dorn controlled. It was worth everything in a room they couldn't. The difference between those two rooms was the difference between a tantrum and a victory, and I had not come this far to settle for a tantrum. I pocketed the crystal beside the plaque shard. 2 secrets now, both deadly, both waiting. Then I did the second thing. I wrote summons, anonymous, careful, to 2 rival houses, inviting their witnesses to the coming succession hunt, hinting that House Dorn's succession was not as settled as it claimed, that there was something worth seeing. I needed outside eyes there, eyes the house couldn't close. It was a risk, and I knew it. Anonymous letters to rival houses, hinting that House Dorn's succession was a lie. If any of them carried it straight to my father, I was finished before the hunt ever began. But I had no choice. The whole strategy depended on witnesses. House Dorn couldn't silence, and you don't get those by asking permission. So I wrote them careful and vague, enough to bait curiosity, not enough to hang myself, and I sent them out into the dark and prayed. Both went clean. I knew it the next morning, because Bren came down to the stables himself, which he never did, and he was holding one of my summons in his fist, and his face had finally lost its smile entirely. He'd worked out enough, not the devourer. Not the truth, but that the maid's boy had evidence of something and was reaching outside the house with it and meant to use the hunt against him. "You've been busy, cousin," he said softly. "Letters to rival houses." "Whatever you think you have." He stopped. His eyes had found Lyra, sleeping in the straw, exhausted and depleted and unguarded. And I watched him do the cruel arithmetic and arrive at the right answer for once. "It's the beast, isn't it? Not the letters." "Her. She's what matters to you." "Leave her alone, Bren. She's house property," he said. "Unstable, dangerous property, by your own father's words. And property can be collared." He raised his ringed hand, the air ring, the same ring that had stolen my dragon, and a thread of the stolen dragon's power answered it, a seal of binding light leaping from the ring toward Lyra. It pinned her flat in the straw, a net of the dragon's own flame, and she was too spent to fight it. "Maybe I'll just take her now," Bren said. "Collar her as House Dorn's, erase your bond, and let you watch." "Challenge law," I said. He froze. "You can't privately seize a beast under formal dispute," I said, fast, before he could finish what the ring was doing. "Not when the owner invokes challenge. The dispute goes to a formal sealed duel at the hunt, witnessed and adjudicated. Touch her outside that, and every rival house I just wrote to will hear. House Dorn broke its own law to do it." I held his eyes. "Collar her now, and you prove me right in front of everyone you most need to lie to." Bren's hand shook with the want to finish it. But he was a creature of audiences too, and he understood, finally, that doing this in the dark would cost him the light. The binding seal held Lyra a moment longer. "Go ahead," I said, and I made my voice steady even though my heart was slamming. "Break your own law in front of me. I'll carry it to every house at the hunt. You can have Lyra, or you can have your good name, Bren. You can't have both, and you've never in your life chosen the harder thing. I held his eyes. You stole a dragon because taking it was easier than earning one. You're the same coward you were in that hall. Everyone's about to find out. It landed. I saw it land, the flinch under the fury, the boy who'd needed a ring to beat me because his own blood hadn't been enough. He hated me most for knowing that. And in that moment, something happened that Bren did not expect, and I will never forget. Lyra, pinned under the stolen dragon's seal, too weak to rise, did the only thing she could. She drank from it. One thread, one single thread of the dragon fire holding her down. She pulled into herself, slow, the tide turning even here, even now. And as that one thread of the dragon's power left the seal and entered her, she lifted her head against the net and dragged one claw, glowing faintly with stolen flame. Across the air where Bren's name mark burned over the bond. It left a scratch, a pale line drawn across the seal of Bren's stolen name. Nothing more. The dragon was leagues away in its great stall. This was only a thread of its power channeled through the ring. The name held. The claim held. But there was a scratch now, a single pale mark across the thing Bren had stolen, and both of us saw it, and both of us understood what it meant. The stolen dragon could be drained. The name could be marked. Given contact, given time, given longer, it could be taken back. Bren saw it too, and the fear in his face was a thing I'd been waiting years to see. He released the seal and stepped back. "Forbidden beast," he said, and his voice was not steady. "That thing is a forbidden beast, and I'll have the elders brand it. You'll never field it. You'll be a cheat struck from the rolls." He fled up the stairs, fast, and I knew he was going straight to the elders to bury us in charges before the scratch could mean anything. By evening, the house notice wall bore my name. Lyra was marked an illegal beast pending investigation, and my succession hunt entry was suspended. The elders read the charge to my face in the adjudicator pavilion because they wanted me to hear it from them before the hunt. "The beast known as the runt is declared a suspected forbidden type, pending investigation," the senior elder intoned. "The ward Suho's entry to the succession hunt is suspended until the matter is resolved." He looked down at me with the comfortable certainty of a man who has the law in his pocket. "The investigation will conclude, conveniently, after the hunt. You will not field. You will not compete. The matter is closed. It was a perfect trap. Suspend the entry, schedule the investigation for too late to matter, and I'd miss the deadline without anyone having to prove anything. The clock would do their work. And I'd be struck from the bloodline for failing to field a beast, exactly as my father had sworn on the day they handed me the crate, disowned, nameless, put out onto the street. While Bren, by simply running out the clock, would take the rule of House Dorn, the whole fortune, and the right to cast me out for good. They didn't even need to beat me. They only needed to keep me off the field. But the adjudicators were not all House Dorn. Some had come from outside. The rival houses I'd summoned had sent observers, and those observers were watching how House Dorn handled a dispute. That gave me a single lever. "Then let her prove she isn't forbidden," I said, "in public, before you rule." 3 field gates. Open trials, the kind any disputed beast may demand under the old proving law. If she passes all 3 in front of these witnesses, the charge is groundless, and I field. If she fails, I withdraw, and you've lost nothing. I let it sit, refuse, and the rival houses watching will wonder what House Dorn is so afraid to let people see. The elders did not want it. The outside adjudicators, hungry for spectacle and suspicious of House Dorn, granted it. 3 public field gates, delaying the charge until after the hunt. I bought us our chance, in the open, where they couldn't bury the result. I want to be clear about what those 3 gates were. They were not a fair chance. House Dorn did not hand out fair chances to maids' boys. Each gate had been chosen because the elders believed it would break Lyra in front of the very witnesses I'd dragged here to see her win. They thought they were giving me a public scaffold. I was betting they'd built me a public stage. The whole story came down to which of us was right about that, and I had nothing to wager but a beast. Everyone had already written off as worthless. The first gate was a maze quarry, a sprawl of stone channels and dead ends, where the disputed beast had to navigate to a far marker while obstacles were thrown at it. It looked like a test of cleverness. It was meant to be a test of how fast we could be sabotaged, because Bren had a hand in setting the obstacles. "Burrow sense," I told Lyra at the gate. "You don't need to see the walls. Feel the path under them. Straight line to the marker." She went in, and the crowd watched her seem to ignore the maze entirely, tracking the marker through solid stone, cutting toward it. Then the fire came. Bran had bribed a handler to release dragonfire into the quarry, a false route, a wall of the stolen dragon's flame thrown across her path to burn her or turn her back, to make her fail the gate. Lingering flame, thick and ancestral, filling a whole channel. The crowd gasped. A forbidden beast cornered by dragonfire, it looked like the end. "Drink it," I said low, only for her. "It's just power, Lyra. It's a meal. Walk through it and take it." She walked into the dragonfire. And she drank it. The lingering flame guttered and thinned and poured into her, channel by channel, the tide turning against fire itself. She crossed the burning route and came out the far side at the marker, unhurt, the tracking tag on her leg glowing white-hot from the heat, and her scales were no longer only gray. Where the dragonfire had touched her, ember scales had risen, glowing faintly orange along her flanks. Banked heat made hers. She'd passed the gate by eating the sabotage. The outside adjudicators were leaning forward now. The rival house observers were murmuring. The second gate was the truth brazier. This one I feared more than fire, because it didn't test what Lyra could do. It tested what she was. The truth brazier showed a beast's lineage. You led the creature before the flame, and the flame revealed the inherited power written in its blood, the line it descended from, the heritage it carried. Every honest beast showed a clean lineage in the fire. It was meant to expose Lyra as a fraud, a powerless runt with no noble line. I led her to the brazier, and the flame rose and showed her truth, and the whole pavilion saw it. There was no lineage. Where every other beast showed an inheritance, a line of power passed down, Lyra showed a void. A black, devouring nothing in the heart of the flame, a hole where heritage should be, drinking the brazier's own light inward and giving nothing back. The fire bent toward it and dimmed, a devouring emptiness on display, exactly as the plaque under the mountain had described. The pavilion recoiled. "Void-born," someone hissed. "It's the old cold kind, a devourer." Voices rose, the words spreading, and I saw the elders' faces light with vicious hope, because the brazier was about to do their work for them. Define her as the forbidden thing, condemn her with her own blood. Before they could, I stepped between Lyra and the flame, and I said it first. "Yes," I said loud, so all of them heard it from me. "She has no inherited power. She owns nothing. Look, the brazier shows it plain. She was born empty." I turned, slow, to the rival houses, to the adjudicators. "Every beast you brought here inherited its strength. Hers was never given. Everything she has, she earned, by surviving everything this house threw at her to break me. That isn't falsehood. That's the truest thing in this pavilion. She is exactly what the fire says, empty of everything she didn't earn." I put my hand on her crowned head. "I'll take a beast that has to earn its power over one that was handed it." I think we all know a thing or two about handed-down power here. My heart was hammering as I said it, because I was gambling everything on a single turn of meaning. The brazier had shown the truth. I couldn't deny the truth. Denial would have damned us. So I'd done the only thing left. I'd claimed it. I'd taken the word they meant as a death sentence, empty, void, devouring, and I'd planted my flag on it before they could. The whole trick of my life had come down to this. They could only see a thing's value in what it was born holding. I had spent years being worth nothing by that measure, and so had she. And I had learned, the hard way, that what you earn outlasts what you're handed. It landed. On the rival houses especially, who had no love for House Dorne's smug inheritance, it landed hard. The void in the brazier stopped looking like a verdict and started looking like a story. I had defined her before my enemies could. The gate held. The third gate was the Stormstag. It stood waiting in the open field, vast and antlered, crackling with caged lightning. A beast whose whole gift was that it never let you touch it. Lightning denies contact. The Stormstag struck from range, bolt after bolt, and every time Lyra closed in, it discharged and flung her back before she could anchor. The one thing she needed, contact, the long hold, was the one thing it would never give. Bolt after bolt drove her back across the field. The crowd watched the runt fail to reach her enemy, and the elders began to smile again. The elders were openly smiling now, and Bran with them. This was the gate they'd been waiting for, the one beast in the world built to defeat exactly what Lyra was. A creature that fed on contact, against a creature that would never allow it. They thought they'd finally found the lock with no key. And watching her thrown back a third time, then a fourth, sand and blood in the air, I felt the panic claw up my throat, because for a moment I thought they were right. Then I made myself think instead of fear. The rule had never been touch it. The rule was contact, however it came. A bolt of lightning is the stag touching you from a distance. The strike was the contact. The weapon was the door. I watched her get knocked back a fourth time, and I understood that she couldn't win this by reaching the stag. She had to let the stag reach her. "Stop chasing," I called. "Stand still. Let it hit you. The lightning is the contact, Lyra. It touches you when it strikes. Take it through the strike." She stopped. She stood in the open field and stopped trying to close the distance, and she lifted her 2 crowns of horns to the sky, and she let the storm stag's next bolt come down on her. The lightning hit, and it didn't throw her back this time because she didn't resist it. She drank it. The bolt poured into her horns, and the tide turned along the lightning itself, draining the storm stag through the very strike meant to deny her. The stag couldn't stop hitting her without stopping its only weapon, and every bolt fed her, and the great antlered beast began to dim, its lightning guttering. Its caged storm pulled out of it bolt by bolt until it stood hollow and dark, and finally fell. And as the last of the storm poured into her, Lyra rose. Not just grew, rose. The light around her bent and reshaped, the way the glamour had reshaped my coat, but this was no borrowed trick. This was her, finally, becoming what the cavern shadow had promised. Beside her beast form, drawn up out of the gathered stormlight, stood a woman. Tall, crowned with the same twin horns. Her hands sparking with conducted lightning that crawled along her fingers and up into the air. She stood beside the great gray beast that was also her, 2 forms of one creature, and she looked across the field and found my eyes, and this time the hand that reached for me was real. I should tell you what it was to see her stand. For so long she had been the thing in the crate, the gray runt, the worthless husk, the secret I carried up from sealed stalls under handfuls of ash. I had protected her smallness because her smallness was her shield. And now she stood in the open with lightning in her hands, tall and crowned and undeniable. Looking at me the way no one in House Dorn had ever looked at me, like I was the one worth reaching for. The secret was gone. The shield was gone. But I found I didn't grieve it. Some things are meant to be seen. The pavilion was utterly silent. A runt had become an apex thing in human shape in front of every house that mattered, and there was no hiding what she was anymore. The secret I'd guarded since the trash yard, it was over. They had all seen, so I closed it on my terms. While they were still struck dumb, I took the memory crystal out of my coat and I held it up where the outside adjudicators could see, and I woke it. This was the moment I had held in my chest since the night I'd taken the crystal from the registrar's office. Every instinct had screamed to play it the day I had it. I'd waited. Through the cavern, through the threats, through the illegal beast charge and 3 gates built to break us, I'd waited because proof is only worth the room it's played in. And now the room was perfect. Adjudicators who didn't answer to House Dorn, rival houses hungry to see the great house humbled, every eye already wide from watching a runt become a woman of storm. There would never be a better room. I raised the crystal and let it speak. The light bloomed, the awakening hall. The dragon, answering my blood, the bond forming to my torn palm. And Bren, there, before them all, stepping in with his air ring and writing his name over a bond that had already chosen me, while the dragon's head still turned toward the maid's boy it had picked. The whole pavilion watched House Dorn's justice become theft in front of the rival houses they could not silence. Bren surged to his feet, his face white. "That proves nothing," he shouted over the rising noise. "Recording or not, the living dragon bears my name. It answers my ring. Mark or no mark, the beast is mine, and possession is the law." And he was right, and that was the trap inside my own victory. The crystal proved the theft. It did not undo it. "The dragon bears my name," Bren said again, slower now, planting it like a flag, "and a recording can't outrank a living bond. Prove I stole it on paper all you like." The beast still answers me. The adjudicators conferred in low voices while the whole pavilion waited. The senior outside adjudicator finally rose. "The recording establishes that the bond's origin is disputed," she said. "It does not, by itself, transfer a living dragon's allegiance. A claim this contested cannot be settled by witness alone." She looked from Bren to me. "It will be settled where succession disputes have always been settled. The succession hunt. Whichever heir's beast prevails on the field holds the claim. Both of you will enter. The dragon's name will be decided by the hunt before all these witnesses." So it came to the field after all. Everything funneled down to the one place it had always been heading, the succession hunt, the deadline carved into my life on the day they handed me the crate. Now the place where it would all be decided at once. Win, and I ruled House Dorn, the name, the fortune, the right to throw every last one of them out into the street they'd promised me. Lose, and I was disowned, nameless, homeless, exactly as my father had sworn. The dragon, the rule, the whole house, my future, all of it riding on one field. Bren did not wait for the formal start. He released the stolen dragon early. Before the hunt clock had even run down, before scoring had begun, he loosed it into the arena to crush Lyra while she was still recovering from the Stormstag, to end the dispute before it could be judged. The great forge-colored beast unfolded into the arena sky, my dragon, the one that had answered my blood, with Bren's stolen name burning bright over its bond. And it turned its vast head toward Lyra and opened its jaws. The hunt clock ran out as it did. Enter now or be struck from the bloodline. That was the rule, and the clock was at 0. The Succession Hunt Arena was the largest open ground in House Dorne, a vast ring under tiered stands packed to the rails. Every house that mattered had come. The rival observers I'd summoned sat in their colors among the Dorne white, and the adjudicators in their gray occupied the high seats. And somewhere in all of it, my father watched the boy he'd thrown away walk out to either take the whole house from them or be cast onto the street forever. I had dreamed of this arena my whole life from the wrong side of it. I had never once imagined walking onto its sand with no house behind me and a runt at my side. I walked into the arena beside Lyra, no beast of my own but her. No power of my own at all, just a maid's boy walking onto a field under a dragon's open jaws, accepting that if this failed, my name was gone forever. The crowd roared. The rival houses stood. My father watched from the elder's rail with an expression I couldn't read, and Bren stood across the field with his ringed hand raised, grinning the grin from the awakening hall. The one that said the world had already been promised to him. The dragon breathed. Ancestral flame flooded the arena, a wall of fire that dwarfed every drop of dragonfire Lyra had drunk at the maze gate, the full strength of the true dragon brought down at once. It reasserted everything. The power gap I'd spent the whole story closing yawned open again in an instant. This was not a strawmite or an ironbeak or a swarm queen. This was the biggest power in the world, and for a moment the fire simply buried us, and I heard the crowd's roar turn to a gasp. Because it looked like the runt and the maid's boy had just been erased. Then the fire parted, and Lyra stood inside it, both forms, beast and woman, the ember scales drinking the flame off her hide. Everything, I said to her, across the bond, across the roar. All of it. Now. And here is the thing I understood, kneeling in the dirt under a dragon's fire, that Bren would not understand until it was far too late. Everything Lyra was about to throw was something he had given her. He had handed me the strawmite to laugh at me, and she'd kept its trick. He'd loosed the iron beak to open her up, and she'd kept its edge. His friends had poisoned her with a thorn wasp core, sent a sandworm, lent a mirror elk, and she'd kept all of it. He'd buried us in a cavern, and she'd come out crowned twice. He'd thrown dragonfire and a stormstag at the gates, and she drunk them both. Every single weapon she had was a humiliation he had personally arranged. He had spent years building the exact thing that was about to take his dragon, one act of cruelty at a time, and he'd never once seen it, because he could only ever see himself winning. And she called the whole arsenal, every humiliation Bren had ever handed me, returned to him at once. Thorn armor spread across the beast form, anchoring her against the dragon's wind. Burrow scents lit her path through the smoke. The mirror elk's glamour bloomed and split her into a dozen Lyras, so the dragon's flame fell on phantoms while the real one closed. The swarm shadow rose off her in a wall of writhing dark, blunting the firelight. Ember scales drank the flame she couldn't dodge. And along her twin crowns, the storm-conducting horns crackled to life, throwing the stormstag's lightning back up into the dragon's chest. A survival combo built out of every beast they'd ever thrown at me to make me small, all of it firing at once, and I felt the whole crowd understand in a single rolling wave of sound. What they were finally looking at. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing I have ever seen. Every humiliation of the last months, every night in the straw, every fight I'd had to sit and watch her take blows in, all of it firing at once. A single survival combo assembled from years of being made small. The crowd, who had come to watch the maid's boy fail one last time, surged to their feet. The rival houses were shouting now. Even the adjudicators had risen. Because no one had ever seen a beast fight like this, with a dozen stolen powers braided together, and they were all, finally, beginning to understand what House Dorne had thrown away in a crate. The dragon roared and the duel closed to contact, and the moment it touched her, the moment the tide could turn, Bren changed the target. Not her, he snarled, and his ringed hand swung toward me. Him. Kill the boy, and the beast has nothing left to fight for. The dragon's head wrenched around, jaws and flame turning away from Lyra and down toward me, standing exposed in the open field with no armor and no power and nothing to take a dragon's fire. Lyra broke contact to reach me. She shouldn't have. Breaking contact meant breaking the drain, the one thing that could win this. But she crossed the field in a heartbeat, the woman form throwing herself between me and the dragon strike, and she caught the descending claw in her bare human hands, lightning crawling up her arms, ember scales flaring along her skin, and she held it over my head, the dragon's full weight bearing down, and Lyra holding it off me with 2 hands and a bottomless will. And she did not let go of it. And I felt the fear then, the real fear, sharper than the dragon's fire. Because she'd broken contact to save me, and breaking contact was supposed to be the one thing that could lose this. She'd chosen me over the win without a heartbeat's hesitation. If that choice cost us the fight, it would be because she loved me more than the victory, and I would have to live with having been worth more to her than her own survival. That is a terrible thing to learn in the middle of a fight you might lose. This was not a victory lap. This was faith, held over an open drop, with everything I cared about hanging from it. That was the thing Bren never understood, not from the first day to the last. He thought making her protect me would break the drain, but protecting me was contact. Her hands were on the dragon now, holding its strike, and the tide turned through that contact the same as it had turned through every other, and as she shielded me she fed, and the dragon's flame, pouring down toward us, began to dim. I saw it. The whole arena saw it. The ancestral fire that had buried us a minute ago, guttered at the edges, thinned, lost its roar. The dragon's strike weakened against Lyra's hands until she pushed it back, until she stood over me unburned with the dragon's own claw caught and failing in her grip. Drinking the biggest power in the world, a thread at a time. Bren panicked. I watched him do it from the dirt looking up. He saw his dragon dimming, saw the duel slipping, and he reached for the only thing he had left, the family inheritance seal. The deepest authority House Dorn held, the seal that carried the weight of the whole bloodline, the same kind of power his heir ring had used to overwrite my bond in the first place. He poured it into the dragon, all of it. Status and blood and ancestral right dumped into the beast at once to overpower Lyra by sheer authority, to remind the field who the dragon belonged to. He fed the inheritance seal straight into the thing Lyra had her hands on. Longer, I said, and I was laughing, I think, low and disbelieving. Lyra, longer, take that too. She took it. The inheritance seal poured into the dragon, and the dragon's name mark blazed up bright. Bren's name, burning in triumph for one last instant, and then Lyra drank it. The seal, the authority, the bloodline's whole weight, all of it the same as everything else in the end. Power, waiting to be taken by a thing that owns nothing and takes all. The tide turned against the inheritance itself, and as that authority left the dragon and entered her, the name burning over the bond began to fail. It was poetry, and I don't think Bren heard the rhyme of it even then. He had stolen my dragon by pouring House Dorn's authority over my bond through his heir ring, status power, written over earned power, the strong taking from the weak because the law let them. And now, panicked, he was pouring that same authority into the dragon a second time, the inheritance seal carrying the full weight of the bloodline. The exact mechanism of the original theft. He was feeding the overwrite straight into the jaws of the one creature alive that turns everything it touches into its own. He thought he was reasserting the theft. He was handing it to her to eat. Bren's name peeled off the dragon. It came away like paint in a fire, the stolen seal blackening and curling and lifting from the bond. The name that had been written over mine with an heir ring at the awakening dissolving in front of every house that mattered. And underneath it, where it had been buried all this time, my own mark burned back into view, my blood mark, the original. The one the dragon had chosen with one breath before the theft, rising up bright and red and undeniable across the great forge-colored chest. The dragon's name was mine again. The crowd's roar shook the arena walls, not the laughter I'd walked into 100 yards in pits with, but a roar of something like awe. The sound a crowd makes when it watches the impossible happen and knows it will tell the story for the rest of its life. The maid's boy, the worthless runt. The stolen dragon, taken back in front of every house that had nodded along when they called the theft justice. Bren stood across the field with his hand still raised over an empty ring, staring at the mark that was no longer his, the inheritance seal gone, the dragon dimmed. Everything he'd stolen draining away in front of the world. But the victory had a cost, and it was at my feet. Lyra had taken the dragon, the flame, the lightning, the inheritance seal, all of it at once, more power than anything alive was meant to hold. The woman form flickered, the beast form swayed. Both of them buckled, and she went down into the arena dirt beside me, the ember scales guttering, the storm horns dark, her crowned head sinking against the ground. She had drunk the biggest meal in the world, and it was burning through her faster than she could hold it. The dragon was mine, It stood in the center of the arena with my blood mark burning across its chest. My dragon, finally. After everything, and all I had to do was call it to me, and the victory would be complete and undeniable. I want you to understand the size of what I was turning away from. That dragon was the thing I had wanted since before I had words for wanting. It was the proof that the trials hadn't lied, that my blood had called true, that a maid's son could be more than the stain my father saw. It was vindication with wings. Every eye in that arena was on it, on my mark burning across its chest, waiting for me to claim it and become, at last, somebody. One word in the story ended the way the boy in the borrowed boots had always dreamed it would. I turned my back on it and dropped to my knees beside Lyra instead. She was shaking in the dirt, both forms flickering between each other, the woman's hand and the beast's claw, the inheritance seal still burning through her too hot to hold. The drain that had taken back my whole life was tearing her apart from the inside. I got my arms around the woman form, around the crowned head, and I held her the way I'd held her on a washroom floor when she was a sickly runt and the only creature in the house that had answered me. "I've got you," I said. "Let some of it go if you have to. The dragon doesn't matter. Stay. Just stay. Take the dragon, Suho." My father's voice. He'd come down to the arena rail, and his face had that conditional warmth again, the one he wore when he wanted something. "Your mark is on it. The claim is yours. Command it to your side, abandon the devourer before it kills you or someone else, and come back to this family as my heir. You've won. Take your prize and be adorned." He spread his hands. "The beast is finished anyway. Let it go and take what you've earned. The dragon, the name, the heir's place, offered for the second time, at the second worst moment of my life, and the price was the same as it had always been. Her, and I felt nothing pulling me this time. That was how I knew I'd already changed. The first time he'd offered at the cavern gate, the old hunger had risen, and I'd had to fight it down. Now there was nothing to fight. The boy who'd ached to be let through that gate had died somewhere, in a washroom, in a sealed stall, in a cavern under the mountain, in an arena full of fire. What was left didn't want the table anymore. What was left only wanted the thing shaking in his arms to keep breathing. I didn't even look up at him. Bran was not finished. I heard the ring scrape and turned to see him stagger forward, his name gone, his dragon gone, his inheritance drained, with nothing left but one last cruelty. The collar seal, the binding meant for unstable property, gathered at his ringed hand, the failing dregs of his stolen authority pulled into one last strike, and he aimed it not at the dragon, not at me, but at Lyra, to collar her, to erase her bond to me even as everything else fell apart, to make sure that if he lost everything, I lost her too. "If I can't have the dragon," he said, voice cracking, "you don't keep the beast." I had a heartbeat to decide, and no power of my own to decide with. That was the cruelest joke of my whole life, laid bare at the very end. I had taken back a dragon, won a succession hunt, broken a great house's hold on me. And I was still exactly what I'd always been. A man with no magic, no combat power, no system, nothing of my own. The only weapon I had ever owned was that I noticed things, and that I refused to spend the people I loved. So I spent the only thing left that was mine to spend. The collar seal flew, and I had one thing left to break with. They'd restored my house name seal the moment my blood mark returned to the dragon, reinstated me, made me adorn again on paper, the leash handed back the instant I was useful. The seal of the family name, glowing on my own hand now, the thing my father wanted me to keep. I broke it. I tore the restored name seal off and threw it into the path of the collar, and the two seals struck and shattered together in a burst of dying light. The collar never reached her. And with it went my legal claim. The name reinstated a breath ago, surrendered a breath later, the bloodline I'd spent my whole life trying to earn given up to shield one beast they'd called worthless. The whole arena saw me do it. My father saw me do it. Lyra rose, out of my arms, steadier now, the woman form drawing itself up with the broken pieces of the name seal cupped in her sparking hands. She looked at the shards, and she looked at me, and across the bond and out loud, in a voice the whole pavilion heard for the first time, low and clear and entirely her own, she said, "Chosen. Not owned. Not property. Not his." Her crowned head lifted toward the watching houses. "He gave up his name to keep me. I take his bond, freely. We chose each other." The words went through the arena like a struck bell. A beast. The thing House Dorn had appraised as worthless, tagged, charged, and tried to collar, standing in human shape and declaring that she had chosen her bond, not been bound to it. It turned everything on its head. They had spent the whole story insisting she was property, a thing to be owned or culled or seized, and now she stood and named herself a person who had made a choice. There was no law in House Dorn written to answer that, because House Dorn had never once imagined a beast might choose. I chose her, I said, on my feet now, loud, for all of them. Over the name, over the dragon. Over every door this house ever closed in my face. She was never the trash you handed me. She was the only thing in this place worth keeping. And across the arena, at last, I watched it land on Bren. His face changed in a way I'd waited the whole story to see. He looked at the dragon with my mark on it. He looked at the husked storm stag and the hollow swarm and remembered every beast he'd thrown at me to watch me fail. And I saw him do the arithmetic, finally, all the way to the end. The strawmite, the ironbeak, the thorn wasp core, the sandworm, the mirror elk, the cavern swarm, the dragonfire, the storm stag, the inheritance seal. Every weapon he'd raised to shame me, she had eaten and grown on and turned into the exact arsenal that took his dragon and left him with nothing. I built it, Bren whispered, and the whole front of the pavilion heard him. Every beast. I fed her every beast. I made the thing that beat me. He sank down where he stood. I did all of this to myself. The adjudicators rose. The senior outside adjudicator's voice carried over the silent arena. The bond's theft is proven by witness and by the dragon's own mark. The claim is decided on the field. Bren of House Dorn is stripped of the succession and of all authority over the disputed dragon. She turned to me. The hunt recognizes Suho and the beast Lyra as the rightful victors. The dragon's mark stands as it has returned, to the blood that first called it. It was done. Formal. Public. Bren stripped, the theft undone, the dragon mine in law and blood, in front of every house House Dorn could never silence. Revenge, closed on the field where it began. I looked at Bren one last time, slumped on the sand with nothing left, and I waited for the triumph to feel the way I'd imagined it would all those nights in the straw. It didn't. It felt quieter than that, and cleaner. I didn't need him broken. I'd thought I would. But watching him understand, finally, that he built his own ruin one cruelty at a time, that was enough. He would carry that the rest of his life. I didn't have to carry anything. Then I turned to the elders, because Bren was never the whole debt. You swore the terms yourselves, I said, loud enough for the rival houses to hear every word. The day you handed me a crate, the hunt decides who rules House Dorn. The winner's word becomes law. The whole fortune passes to his hand. And the winner may cast out any name he chooses. Yours. His. Every one of yours. I let it sit on them. I won. By your own oath, the house is mine. Every coin, every stone, and the right to put each of you out on the street you promised me. The arena went very still. I watched it move through them. The moment the wager they'd been so certain of turned in their hands and closed around their own throats. And then they began to wriggle. The senior elder rose, smooth as oiled rope. The hunt settles the disputed dragon, he said. Nothing more. The rule of House Dorn passes by blood and by the confirmation of this council. It is not carried off on the back of a beast. His eyes found the broken shards of the name seal in Lyra's hands, and I watched him find his door. And in any case, the ward has no standing to claim it. He renounced the name himself. With his own hand, before all of you, he tore the House Dorn seal apart and cast it away. A man who has thrown off the name cannot inherit the house. He forfeited the claim the moment he broke it. A murmur of agreement ran the Dorn rail, the same heads that had nodded when they called the theft justice. Let him keep his dragon and his monster. The house is not his. There is no clause that seats a nameless maid's son over the blood. There it was, the old trick, worn smooth from years of use. They did not deny the bet. They renamed it. They had sworn the oath when they were certain they could not lose it, and now that they had lost, they reached for the fine print, the bloodline, the council. The very sacrifice I'd made to save Lyra, any loophole that would let them keep the fortune and the rule and their own skins off the street. They would honor exactly as much of their word as cost them nothing. It was the most Dorn thing I had ever seen. My father came toward me through the noise, and the conditional warmth was back on his face. Don't shame us, Suho, he said, low and urgent. Take the dragon. Come home. We will confirm you in time, properly, as heir. There are forms, there are years to it. Let this wild talk of casting out your own blood go. You're a Dorn again. Let that be enough. And I almost laughed, because I finally understood them all the way down. They had been certain enough to swear an oath in front of every house that mattered. Now they would lie and bend and rewrite their own words rather than honor it. Losing had not made them honest. It had only made them afraid. I could have fought it. The rival houses had heard the oath. The adjudicator stood right there. I might have forced the council, dragged the whole rotten house through the same law I'd just beaten Bren with. Made them hand over the fortune and the rule and watched them turned out onto the street one by one. Part of me wanted it. I won't pretend otherwise. But I looked at the name seal in Lyra's hands, in pieces, and I understood I'd already given my answer when I broke it. Keep the house, I said. The whole arena heard it. Keep the wing, keep the table. Keep the fortune and the name you're so frightened of losing. I don't want the leash, even with a crown welded onto it. I put my hand on Lyra's, the woman form's, lightning crawling warm against my palm. You spent my whole life telling me what I was worth. That's the only thing I ever came to take back from you, and I already have it. You don't get to define me anymore. You never did. I felt the strangest lightness saying it. All my life, the name had been the thing I reached for, and the thing they hit me with, both at once, the prize and the leash welded together so I could never take one without the other. They thought they'd cheated me out of the house. They never understood that the house was never the prize. The prize was that they had lost, forever, the right to say what I was worth. That right was Lyra's now, and mine, and no one else's. Let them keep their gold. They'd already lost the only thing that had ever made them my masters. So we walked. The maid's boy and the runt they'd thrown away, the dragon falling in behind us of its own will, my blood mark bright across its chest. The rival houses parted for us. My father did not follow, and the elders did not call me back because they thought they'd kept the part that mattered, the gold, the rule, the roof, and they were welcome to it. I was leaving with the only things I had ever actually wanted, and not one of them was Dorn. We were almost to the gates when the ground beneath the arena shuddered. Far below, under the oldest stone of the proving ground, something I'd felt the edge of once before woke up. The plaque shard in my coat went cold against my chest, then warm, then burning. And out past the arena, where the forgotten structures of House Dorn's first age stood sealed, a sound rolled up out of the deep, a vault grinding open that had not moved in lifetimes. The old registry vault, the one that kept the records of the culled. It had stayed shut through every fight, every gate, every drained beast, waiting, I understood now, for a devourer to finish growing. For one to reach maturity. None ever had. The plaque had sworn none ever would be allowed to. Lyra just had. On the arena sand, in front of the world, she had taken a true dragon and a bloodline's whole authority into herself and survived it. She had finished growing, and something far older than House Dorn had been waiting all this time to feel exactly that. The vault did not open empty. Light poured up out of it, not torchlight, not dragonfire, something colder and far older, the dead black color of the void in the truth brazier. And in that light, rising, came a banner none of us had ever seen, a sigil from before, House Dorn, before the great houses, before the powdered elders and their thin little laws. A herald's voice rolled across the arena, vast and flat and not quite human, and it did not care who ruled House Dorn, or who held the dragon, or who had won the hunt. It spoke a single word. The word was the old name for what Lyra was, and it carried a sentence with it. All at once, the gold and the rule and the wriggling elders meant nothing. There was a power in the world that stood above every house and every law of theirs, one that had hunted things like Lyra to nothing in an age the houses had forgotten. And it had just woken to the one thing it existed to end. It had not come for the dragon. It had not come for the fortune. It had come for her. Lyra's head turned toward it. Both forms went still, and across the bond I felt something I had never felt from her before, not hunger, not patience, but the closest thing to fear a thing like her could hold. I had spent the whole story making her unrivaled. I was about to learn what she had been made unrivaled for. Suho and Lyra reached the gates with everything won and nothing safe. As the old registry vault cracked open, and a power older than House Dorn rose to claim the devourer that should never have been allowed to grow.